Today we're going to read in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The story is told of a person who met a stone sculptor. As they talked about the various works that the sculptor had produced, the intrigued gentleman, with genuine wonder at the skill displayed in producing a statue of a man, he asked the sculptor how it was that he was able to change a plain block of stone into such a perfectly detailed figure. The sculptor replied, "It's really quite simple. I just chisel away everything that doesn't look like a man." Now, the point that I want to bring out of that story is this. The starting point for creation in verses 1 and 2 was quite different from the finished work at the start of chapter 2. Whenever we think of God creating the heaven and the earth in verse 1, we're inclined to think of the heaven and the earth as they are presently. But what God made in verse 1 was actually quite different from the finished work of verse 31. God's work of creation took time. Indeed, we might ask the question, why did God take 6 days? Why not take 6 seconds? Or why not take a sixth of a second? Either was easy to God. The answer is this. God does things in a way that we might learn lessons about him and how he works. Paul tells us that God is not the author of confusion in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. He is a God of order. In Hebrews chapter 1, we read these words, "God in sundry times and in diverse manners spoke unto the fathers." In other words, God unfolded himself to humanity in a step-by-step way. We learn these things from the 7 days of creation. But God also did it in 7 days to give us a constant reminder of creation. It is the reason we have a 7-day week, because there's no astronomical rationale for such a division of time, and there's no other explanation. So what did Moses mean when he said that the earth was without form and void in verse number 2? Was there some sort of a problem with it? To me, the answer is plainly no. In verse 1, God created the raw materials of the creation: time, space, and matter. All the matter of the universe was in the space that God had created, and it appears to have been one amorphous lump covered in exceptionally deep water. It's called the deep. In other words, it didn't have the detail of the finished creation. It was without form. And it didn't have the creatures of the finished creation. It was void. That would come later. It was raw material. Now, it's often been pointed out that the first 3 days of creation week were used to provide form to the creation, and the next 3 days to fill the void. Forming and furnishing is another way I've heard it put. There's one more thing that we learn in this verse that is fundamental to every work of God. The Spirit of God moved, is what we read. For the work to be God's work, it must be done in the power of the Spirit of God. Not in our own strength, not in our own way, not by our own means. As chapter 3 will show us, that's when we come to grief. Next, we will see something that is central to God's creative work.